Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the hidden and, frankly, fascinating history of one of America's most recognizable condiment empires. You know that ketchup bottle sitting in your fridge right now? Well, it has a backstory that goes way, way beyond the grocery store shelf. So, here's the big question we're looking at today. How on earth did the Heinz family transform from a model of intense moral obligation into a corporate giant hiding behind legal settlements and erased histories? It's a dramatic evolution, and it actually tells us a whole lot about wealth, legacy, and human nature. Let's get into it. Section 1. The transparent glass bottle. This whole thing kicks off back in 1869 with a Bavarian immigrant son, Henry John Heinz, and a simple but completely radical idea. By 1875, Henry had survived a crushing bankruptcy that took literally everything he had. But instead of just walking away and starting over, he invented something in 1876 that he called the MO notebook. MO stood for moral obligations. It was an actual physical ledger where he painstakingly tracked down and repaid every single creditor in full. He had absolutely zero legal duty to do this. The bankruptcy courts had already cleared his name, but his personal honor demanded it. And that deep moral conviction, it actually manifested physically in his products. Back in the 1860s, horseradish was usually sold in dark brown crocks. Why? Well, to hide the fact that producers were padding it with turnips or, if you can believe it, wood shavings. Henry, on the other hand, sold his in clear glass. It was a wildly bold statement. He was essentially telling the consumer, look at it, the product I'm selling is exactly what the label describes, and I am prepared to prove it. For Henry, transparency wasn't just some clever marketing gimmick, it was a moral imperative. Section 2. The excluded California branch. But, when Henry died in 1919, that foundational transparency really started to fracture across the succeeding generations of his family. Two completely different realities started to emerge. On one hand, you had the Pittsburgh heirs. They became civic royalty, funding university chapels, keeping tight corporate control, and driving massive global growth. Meanwhile, Henry's son, Clifford, had moved out west. When Clifford was dying in a hotel room in 1935, his own children weren't even told until it was too late. On that very deathbed, his descendants were completely disinherited, which sparked a bitter 50-year legal war. The Pittsburgh branch effectively erased their California relatives from the official, well-funded family history. Section 3. Paying off moral debts. You see, the family's approach to obligations was mutating rapidly. It was shifting from Henry's honorable MO ledger to a highly secretive system of making inconvenient problems simply disappear. Take a look at this number, $25,000. In 1940, this was the exact price paid to quietly settle the tragic death of a woman named Marie Jennings in Pittsburgh. The circumstances were directly connected to Henry's grandson, Rust Heinz, but there was no public trial, no widespread accountability, and her name sure never appeared on any of the massive philanthropic buildings the Heinz family was putting up. The matter was just closed. So we hit this incredibly bitter irony. Henry went completely broke and gave up everything he had to clear his name in public. His descendants, though, they used their immense institutional wealth to do the exact opposite, to simply hide their actions from the public. They had become the literal inverse of their founder, clearing moral debts by the absolute minimum financial means with zero public record. Section 4. A tragic spring afternoon. Now, amidst all this growing culture of secrecy, one heir actually emerged who seemed to genuinely embody the founder's original integrity and commitment to public service. This was Senator H.J. Heinz III. Growing up out in California, disconnected from the Pittsburgh bubble, he really built his own identity. He was elected to Congress in 1971 and then the Senate in 1976. And he stood out in Washington. He was a genuine public servant, known for crossing party lines and being this joyfully ferocious environmentalist. And remarkably, he was known as one of the very few politicians who actually took the time to read the bills he voted on. But tragically, his life was cut entirely too short. On April 4, 1991, during a completely routine flight, a helicopter was ordered to perform a totally unnecessary visual check on his plane's landing gear, which, by the way, was deployed correctly. The two aircraft collided in midair right over a Lower Merion Township elementary school on a clear spring afternoon, killing the senator and 5 other people. It was a sudden, devastating end to a uniquely principled chapter of the family's history. Section 5. The political liability. With the senator gone, the stewardship of this vast fortune fell to his widow, Teresa, and this pushed the Heinz name onto a volatile, highly scrutinized new stage. As the sources outline, after Teresa Heinz married Democratic Senator John Kerry in 1995, the dynamics completely shifted. By the time the 2004 presidential election rolled around, the Heinz fortune, which was estimated at up to $1 billion, became a massive political liability. For decades, the Heinz company had carefully curated this brand of absolute political neutrality, just so their ketchup could safely sit in every American's fridge. But during this election, that vast wealth became a primary target for opposition strategy. A civic brand was suddenly transformed into a huge partisan flashpoint. Section 6. The Corporate Betrayal. So, as the family is navigating all this intense politics, the ketchup empire itself is about to face a ruthless, spreadsheet-driven transformation that would strip away its foundational identity. In 2013, 3G Capital and Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway acquired the H.J. Heinz Company for a staggering $28 billion. Just like that, the era of any family influence was definitively over, entirely replaced by a strictly numbers-driven philosophy. They brought in a totally new corporate playbook. We're talking about zero-based budgeting. That basically means every single cost, down to the penny, had to be justified from scratch every single year. The impact of this was immediate and brutal. Mass layoffs, the gutting of the historic Pittsburgh headquarters, and really aggressive cuts to research and development and marketing. The very soul of the institution was being hollowed out just for short-term margin gains. And this ruthless efficiency, it caused a perfectly predictable corporate death spiral. By underinvesting in their core brands, they subsequently lost extremely valuable grocery shelf space to their rivals. Dropping revenue meant even more pressure for further cost reductions, and all of this ultimately destroyed the underlying value of the company itself, leading to a massive $15.4 billion write-down in 2019. Even Warren Buffett himself later admitted the acquisition was a mistake. Honestly, this contrast perfectly illustrates the ultimate betrayal of the founder's promise. Think about it. In 1875, Henry Heinz went completely bankrupt just to pay his honest debts and maintain total transparency. Fast forward to 2021, and Kraft Heinz is handing over a $62 million settlement to the SEC over allegations of manipulating supplier contracts to inflate earnings and falsify numbers to their shareholders. A brand that was literally built on a guarantee of absolute purity was caught misrepresenting its own reality. But maybe the seeds for all of this were planted a long time ago. As the source material points out regarding that legendary 57 varieties slogan, it was always a manufactured illusion of exactness presented as a guarantee of what was inside. Henry just picked the number 57 while riding on a train in New York because he liked how it sounded. He was already making over 60 products at the time. It kind of proves that from the very beginning, the brand relied pretty heavily on the illusion of exactness to sell trust. So that leaves us with a final thought to ponder today. When that clear glass bottle is eventually replaced by erased family branches, corporate cover-ups, and massive SEC settlements, what does a legacy actually mean? What is the true legacy of the Heinz name when the promise of transparency is entirely replaced by the price of secrecy? It really makes you look at that ketchup bottle a little bit differently, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.